The night was dark, and the road stretched out like a ribbon in front of me. I had just finished a long shift at the hospital, and I was tired. The clock on my car dashboard read 10 a.m. I was eager to get home, but the winding road through the woods was lonely and eerie. The trees loomed on either side, casting long shadows that danced in the headlights. As I drove, I turned up the music, hoping to stay awake. It was my favorite playlist, loud and upbeat. But even that couldn't shake off the feeling of unease creeping in. The road was empty, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the faint crackle of the radio. I passed a sign that read, "Welcome to Cedar Grove." I had lived in this small town my whole life, but it felt different at night. The familiar landmarks were now cloaked in darkness, and everything seemed more menacing. Just as I was about to reach a sharp turn, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A pair of headlights appeared behind me. They were bright, almost blinding, and I could feel the adrenaline surge through my body. I glanced back, but the car was too far away to see clearly. I pressed my foot on the gas pedal, wanting to put some distance between myself and the unknown driver. The car followed closely, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Part 2. The chase. The road twisted and turned, and I struggled to keep my cool. I took a deep breath and tried to focus on driving, but every time I looked in the mirror, the car was still there. It was a dark sedan, and the driver kept their headlights on high beam, making it impossible to see anything else. I decided to pull over at a small rest area ahead. Maybe I could lose them there. As I parked under a flickering light, the dark sedan slowed down but didn't stop. I watched as it passed, my heart racing. I let out a sigh of relief, but as I sat there, I realized I wasn't alone. The shadows moved around me, and the air felt heavy. I stepped out of the car, hoping to calm my nerves. I looked around the rest area. It was empty, save for a few benches and a trash can. Suddenly I heard it, the sound of footsteps. I turned quickly, scanning the darkness, but there was no one there. I felt a chill run down my spine. Deciding I had to get moving, I climbed back into my car. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The dark sedan had returned and was now parked a little way down the road. The driver sat inside, the headlights off, just watching. I couldn't take it anymore. I started the engine and drove away, my heart pounding in my chest. Part 3. The woods. As I drove deeper into the woods, the road became narrower and more winding. I could feel the weight of the dark sedan's gaze on me, but I tried to shake it off. I switched the music back on, hoping it would distract me. The familiar tunes filled the car, but the unease lingered. The trees closed in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I kept glancing at the mirror, half expecting to see the dark sedan behind me. But there was nothing. Maybe I had lost them after all. Then I saw it, a flicker of light ahead. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. As I got closer, I realized it was a small cabin, its windows glowing with a warm light. Relief washed over me. Maybe I could stop and ask for help. I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. The cabin looked old but cozy. I stepped out, my heart still racing. I approached the door and knocked, hoping someone would answer. After a moment, a woman opened the door. Her hair was wild, and her eyes looked tired but kind. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice warm. "I was just driving home and saw your cabin. I thought I'd stop for a moment," I said, forcing a smile. Come in," she said, stepping aside. "It's safer inside." Part 4. The woman in the cabin. I entered the cabin, and the warmth wrapped around me like a blanket. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting a flickering glow across the room. The walls were lined with books, and the scent of something delicious wafted through the air. "Do you want some tea?" she asked, heading to the small kitchen. "Yes, please," I replied, feeling a little more at ease. As she prepared the tea, I glanced around. There were strange paintings on the walls, dark and haunting images of the woods and shadowy figures. I felt a chill run down my spine but brushed it off. "So what brings you out here at this hour?" she asked, handing me a steaming cup. "I work at the hospital, and I was just driving home when I felt like I was being followed," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Followed? By whom?" "I don't know," I said, looking out the window. "A dark sedan. It kept tailing me until I saw your cabin." Her expression shifted. "You should be careful. The woods can be dangerous at night." "Dangerous how?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "There are things in these woods, things that don't want to be disturbed." Part 5. The unease grows. As she spoke, I felt a sense of dread creep over me. I sipped the tea, trying to steady my nerves. "What do you mean by things?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She sat down across from me, her expression serious. "The forest has its own spirit. It protects its secrets. Some say it's angry when people disturb it." I shivered, looking at the paintings again. They seemed to come alive in the firelight, the shadowy figures twisting and turning. I felt a sudden urge to leave, but the thought of being back out on the road alone frightened me more. "Have you ever seen anything?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Once," she replied, her eyes distant. "I saw a figure watching me from the trees. It was tall and dark, and its eyes glowed like embers." My heart raced as I thought about the dark sedan. "You mean like a person?" "Not quite," she said, her voice low. "More like a shadow, a watcher. It's not human." Part 6. A sudden noise. Just then, a loud crash echoed from outside, making us both jump. I stood up, my heart pounding. What was that? "Stay here," she instructed, her tone serious. She moved toward the door, and I felt a wave of panic. I didn't want to be left alone in this cabin, especially after what she had said. "Wait," I called after her, but she was already outside. I rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. I could see her moving cautiously around the side of the cabin. My mind raced with fear. What if that figure she described was out there? What if it was the driver of the dark sedan? After a moment, I heard her call out. "It's just an animal," she shouted, her voice relieved. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. But then I noticed something strange. The dark sedan was parked at the edge of the clearing, its headlights off, but I could see the outline of the car clearly. Part 7. A terrifying discovery. "Are you okay?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, but..." She hesitated, looking toward the car. "That's not a safe place for anyone to be at this hour." I stepped outside, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. The dark sedan sat ominously in the shadows, and I could see a figure inside, but I couldn't make out any details. "Should we call the police?" I suggested, my voice shaking. She shook her head. "No, we can't attract attention. Let's go inside and lock the door." I followed her back into the cabin, and she quickly shut the door, locking it tight. "What do you think they want?" I asked, fear gnawing at me. "I don't know, but we have to stay quiet," she whispered. We sat in silence, listening. The crackling of the fire was comforting, but outside I could hear the faint sound of footsteps moving around the cabin. My heart raced as I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see the dark figure. Part 8. The figure approaches. Suddenly, there was a loud thud on the door. We both jumped, and the woman's eyes widened in fear. "They're trying to get in." I pressed my back against the wall, feeling paralyzed with terror. "What do we do?" "We need to hide," she whispered urgently. "Follow me." She led me to a small closet at the back of the cabin. It was cramped, and I could feel her breath quickening as we squeezed inside. The darkness enveloped us, and I could hear the pounding of my heart. We listened as the door rattled, the sound echoing in my ears. "Let us in," a voice called, harsh and demanding. It didn't sound like the driver of the dark sedan. It was something else, something darker. Part 9. The Unseen Terror. "Who are they?" I whispered, panic rising in my throat. "I don't know, but they're not here for a friendly visit," she replied, her voice trembling. I could hear the footsteps outside, moving around the cabin, the sound of voices whispering and laughing. It sent chills down my spine. My mind raced with possibilities. What were they doing? Why were they here? "Stay quiet," she hissed as the voices grew louder. I pressed my hands to my mouth, trying to stifle my fear. Then I heard a voice, a familiar one. "You can't hide forever," it called out, mocking. It was the driver of the dark sedan. I felt a surge of panic. How did they find me? Part 10. The Escape Plan. "We need to escape," I whispered urgently. The woman nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "There's a back door, if we can make it to the car." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Let's go on 3. "Okay," she replied, her voice steady but low. 1, T2, T3. We burst out of the closet and rushed to the back door. I could hear the footsteps moving closer, their voices growing louder. "They're inside. Get them." I fumbled with the doorknob, my hands shaking. The door creaked open, and we slipped out into the night, the cool air hitting me like a wave. I could see the dark sedan illuminated by the moonlight, its windows reflecting the light ominously. "Run!" she shouted, and we sprinted toward my car. My heart raced as I glanced over my shoulder. The dark figures were spilling out of the cabin, their faces twisted in anger. Part 11. The chase begins again. We reached the car, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling. "Hurry," the woman urged, glancing back at the approaching shadows. Finally, I got the door open, and we both jumped inside. I slammed the door shut and started the engine, the sound roaring to life. The dark sedan was now parked behind us, and the figures were rushing toward us, their faces obscured by the night. "Drive," she shouted as I put the car in reverse, slamming the gas pedal down. The tires screeched as I backed out of the driveway. I could see the figures closing in, their movements frantic. I whipped the car around and sped down the road, the headlights illuminating the way ahead. The woods rushed past us, the trees blurring in the darkness. Part 12. The Forest's Wrath. As I drove, I could hear the woman gasping beside me. "We need to get to the main road," she urged, her voice panicked. "I know," I shouted, trying to keep my focus. The fear coursed through my veins as I glanced in the mirror. The dark sedan was right behind us, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The road twisted and turned, and I pressed harder on the gas, my heart racing. I couldn't let them catch us. "What do they want?" I asked, desperate for answers. "Maybe they want revenge," she said, her voice low. "They might have been drawn to the cabin, or to the stories that haunt these woods." "What stories?" I asked, confused. "The stories of the Watchers. They say if you disturb them, they will come for you." I couldn't wrap my head around it. "You mean those shadowy figures?" "Yes, they can take any form, and they don't like outsiders." Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back of the car. I jerked the wheel, and the car swerved off the road, narrowly missing a tree. "What was that?" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "They're trying to scare us," she yelled, her voice rising with fear. Part 13. The Final Push. I fought to regain control, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We need to get to the main road." The darkness felt suffocating, and I pressed the gas pedal even harder. The dark sedan was still behind us, relentless, its headlights glowing like fire. Then, up ahead, I saw a faint light, the main road. I pushed the car faster, my heart racing with hope. We were almost there. As I turned onto the main road, I could see the headlights of other cars in the distance. Relief washed over me. "We made it," I exclaimed, but just as I thought we were safe, the dark sedan swerved to the side, blocking our path. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching. "No!" I shouted. The sedan's engine roared, and the figures inside moved closer, their faces still shrouded in darkness. I could feel their anger radiating toward us, an overwhelming force. "Don't let them in!" the woman yelled, panic rising in her voice. Part 14, The Last Stand. I gripped the steering wheel, my heart racing. The sedan was inching closer, and I could see the shadowy figures starting to exit the car. They moved like smoke, swirling in the air. "Drive," she urged, her voice filled with desperation. I hit the gas, swerving to the side as I tried to get around the sedan. I could see the road ahead, light spilling from the buildings and the faint sound of music in the distance. I pushed harder on the gas, praying we would make it. The dark figures were closing in, but I couldn't let fear take over. I could see the other cars now, their headlights cutting through the night. I was almost there. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the cabin as a truck approached from the opposite direction. The figures froze, their movements halting as if they were caught in a spotlight. Part 15, The Aftermath. I seized the moment and swerved past the dark sedan, racing toward the truck. As we passed, I could see the figures retreating, their forms fading back into the shadows. I drove until I reached the nearest gas station, pulling in and parking with a screech. The woman and I jumped out, still shaking with adrenaline. "What just happened?" I gasped, my heart still pounding. "I don't know, but we're safe now," she replied, looking back at the road. The dark sedan was nowhere in sight. As we caught our breath, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We tell people," she said, her eyes serious. "We make sure they know about the watchers in the woods." And as I stood there, the light from the gas station illuminating our faces, I realized the woods would always hold their secrets. But I wouldn't let fear control my life. I would share our story and warn others. We had survived the night drive, but the shadows would always linger, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to wander too close. Part 16, Epilogue. Months later, I often found myself reflecting on that night. I moved on with my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the shadows. I shared my story with friends and family, warning them about the dark sedan and the figures that haunted the woods. Some listened, others laughed it off. But I knew the truth. Every time I drove home at night, I felt the weight of those shadows watching me, waiting for the moment I would return to their realm. I still loved driving through the woods, but I never did so without a sense of caution. I learned to respect the darkness, to understand that some places are better left undisturbed. And as I cruised through the familiar winding roads, I always kept an eye on my rearview mirror, just in case.